I'd like to introduce Arts NK, and I'll let you talk about yourselves, but if I just say a little bit about how it links with the University of Lincoln. Arts NK have received quite a lot of money.
2.6 million.
2.6 million from the Arts Council England, ACE, to engage with the unengaged in the arts, but have been working in the participatory arts area for many, many years. And I and Chris Highton from University of the Arts, Chris, just were critical friends on that project. And the conversations that started very quickly, we realised that there was crossover between the way that co-creation or participatory design engages with users or different stakeholders in creative ways. There was much crossover with participatory art as well. And the conversations have been evolving in that way. So the fact that we were having this event and the fact we have such a large ACPP, which is Creative People and Places, project on our doorstep, looking at a particular area, which is Boston and Spalding in Lincolnshire, and the fact that you've been working in that area, Nick, for
too many years.
Too many years. I thought that it would be absolute crime if we didn't invite Arts NK here, and also I thought it'd be fun to bring the caravan and for you to meet some of the artists who are engaging with those communities in creative ways. And also, the project where we're at with Transported at present, we've got some very nutty issues, I think.
Difficult rather than crazy.
Let's go for both definitions. To do with evaluation and measuring of these types of projects, one, and how that reflects in terms of the Arts Council's view of those types of large projects. And secondly, how to capture these types of projects, not just from a numerical data perspective, which is really what the Arts Council wants, but from an artistic, creative perspective, and how you capture all of that wonderfulness and those nuances visually. So you end up having visual data, which you can then archive, mine, reflect upon, use for new research. You know, because it helps us build on the knowledge of those projects that have gone before. And I'm concerned that there's lots of projects like this going on and we're not capturing it. And I'm very aware that with the DOT projects, which the Design Council drove forward, hopefully most of you know about those, you know, which again were huge amounts of money, driven by policy, and we don't have much apart from a great PhD that Rob drove. There's a couple of books, I think, but we haven't got much to show for all of that £10 million. Potentially, I know lots of companies have been set up, micro companies, but so I'm aware of that from policy level down to a very practical level, and I just wanted to start that art design dialogue. I'll shut up now, but is that right, Nick?
Yeah, that's fine.
You want to say something about more?
I put it into context, I guess. I work for an organisation called Arts NK, and we were born as the art service of the District Council, if you like, that had originally had relatively modest ambitions. It was a conservative rural council, and the leader of the council wanted to support the arts, and so they went on a period of research to see what would be appropriate to do in the rural area at a time when community arts was being born in cities, if you like, and so community arts was in large part a response to urban environments, and North Cassel District Council looked at the organisation Common Ground and saw there some suggestions that they thought would be appropriate for us to pick up and develop in North Castellan. So projects like Parish Maps, New Milestones, New Life projects, those sorts of things, pieces of public art that were developed in villages, built with the people that lived there, and that were largely of that place, so that they were a celebration of what made those places in the minds of the people that lived there or visited made them special and distinct. And that was our roots, if you like. And the service grew year on year to the point where my post, I was originally employed as a rural arts development worker, and now there's a team of 14 people that are delivering the Arts Engage service to North Kesteven and with other partners in the rest of the county. And it was in that role, if you like, that I was asked by Arts Council to support the development of the Bid for Creative People and Places project in Boston and South Holland. So I don't know whether many of you know the Arts Council's mission statement is great art for everyone. I think they were genuinely and honestly saying, we've done the great art bit, but we haven't done the everyone. And so before they get radically restructured beyond even being able to see that mission statement, they put some money aside, or some of the more radical members of the Arts Council put some money aside to do the for everyone bit. And I think their premise was they wanted to find new ideas of getting people involved in the arts, because in areas of least engagement, if the solutions were already out there, they would already be happening and those people would already be engaged with the arts. So the Creative People and Places scheme, I think, was asking for radical ideas of how you could get people who were least engaged actually either looking at or taking part in the arts. And our response was the Transported Project. Boston and South Holland is the centre of the food import and growing industry. So it's full of haulage companies and full of lorries. It's also a very isolated area, so people getting to arts experience is a challenge. And I guess part of what we did right at the very beginning in open space meetings was talk about what the likely barriers were to people taking part in the arts in that area. And the suggestions were that obviously it's costly to get to places, art doesn't offer them anything, it's not relevant to them, art is elitist, all those sorts of things. So Transported, if you like, was a response to those ideas of why people didn't engage. It was a response to the character of the area. And it is about taking great art experiences into those rural villages. But I guess at the very heart of it is, if you ask people what they want to do and what's relevant to do, they can only answer according to their experience to that point. So what Transported is about is identifying where there are areas of common interest, getting those people together and taking them to see great art, and then bringing back that experience and ambition and developing their projects locally. So I can give you an example of a project that we did in North Kesteven. We had several villages that had improvement schemes that they wanted to do on village greens or whatever. And then they basically were saying, we want you to do with us what you've done with that village next door. And our answer was, well, we don't want to just repeat, we actually want to push people's ambition and push the quality of what we're doing. So we took representatives of these villages to Barcelona, and they obviously had a whale of a time and ate fantastic food and drank the lovely wine and saw Gaudi and other stuff, and came back. And the idea wasn't just to make stuff like Gaudi in rural Lincolnshire, it was to take what Gaudi had done to inspire him to do the various things he'd done in Barcelona, for them to do the same in their villages. And so that's sort of the approach that we want to use for Transported.
But it's the engaging, the unengaged, and using creative processes to collect, the users or participants' views on how to move forward and how to kind of co-create. So even though we might use different languages in art and design, I thought there was crossovers of experience and crossovers of community engagement, whatever those communities are, that I thought it was really useful for Transported experience to be put in the pot.
I'll ask a question about the trip to Barcelona.
Yeah.
So you say there were people in villages who were interested in knowing and were asking you, and you took them on a trip to Barcelona. But which people were they? Were they?
They were residents, not parish councillors. They were the residents that had expressed an interest in being involved in the project. In lots of those villages, because I've been there 20 years, some of them have already had projects or had taster projects, taster workshops. So it was people that were practically involved rather than parish councils.
Did you work with designers on the project? 'Cause it seems to me there's two areas within that you might think about as design. One is designing the system or the service by which you take the art to the people, take the people to the art. And the other is then these elements of that system or service, which might be communications, websites, or you know, the caravan itself and the chairs that go in it.
With some of those projects, yes, we did, and I think that's an important point in terms of what we want to do with Transported, is whilst Arts Council are saying it's the for everyone bit, we can't lose sight of the great art. It has to be aspirational, it has to be good quality, and what we want to do is inspire, if you like, the best and most challenging artworks to happen under the Transported banner. So partnerships with other specialists is absolutely crucial. If you like, we were, before I worked for the District Council, I worked for an organisation here called Roots Art. So I'm essentially a community artist and then have become an arts manager within the District Council. So that's my background. I think we need to work with other designers and other experts to make sure that we get the most out of the investment of this time and energy into Boston and South Holland. And the individual strands of what we do stand the best chance of sticking, of having an impact, of being sustained. And that's not necessarily that we get funded to carry on doing it ad infinitum, which as a local authority we've been lucky enough to have that support in NK. In Boston and South Holland it might be that it's the individual strands that are carried on, separate to Arts NK and Transported, or the people that we work with carry on and roll on to do other projects. So absolutely, for Transported we've tried to bring together different designers, different experts to help us do exactly that. So the caravan is, to an extent, a perfect example of our starting point, in as much as we commissioned, I think it was 38 individual artists and performers to go out to where people meet, naturally come together, to present an arts experience and then to begin a conversation about what should happen next. And that was very specifically because it's about engaging with the non-engaged. So we didn't want to go to, we didn't want to advertise too much what was going on. We actually wanted to go to food factories where we're more likely to be meeting some of the Polish, Lithuanian, Russian migratory workers that aren't engaged with the arts here and get a conversation with them, or at a school gate. So we had an ice cream van that was converted as a mobile arts resource. And the caravan, Katie was one of the commissioned artists, and parked the caravan next to temporary cafes in lay-bys to talk to the people that are travelling through the area about their experience and what sort of things might stick.
Because that sort of stuff becomes really interesting if we think about how people are talking about the use of design yesterday, because you would be thinking, okay, you would look at, you would map that out as a journey of the various different axes that you would like to encounter. And during that sort of, one way of doing it is that, during that sort of journey of their day, you'd say, okay, well, where do they stop for a minute that we might engage with this? Okay, lay-by, tea. So it's just interesting that there are sort of these formalised tools and approaches that people perhaps use in service or system design, which are sort of practical and sensible and therefore used by people when they're being practical and sensible about how to deliver something that could be perceived as system or service. And it's about actually, is there any value then in having this sort of formalised design approach to it, rather than, will that make it more nuanced or more effective than this non-design specific approach, which is equally capable, it seems, of being systemic and understanding almost through being a bit sensitive about it, understanding that you can't talk to people when they're running past you at a train station, you might be able to spend more time with a lay-by.
But it's language sometimes, in different, I suppose, professional worlds. And it was quite interesting when Nick was saying you trying to actually get some of the arts officers and the performing artists to get the right people and stuff. I was asking, well, what language do you use? And it always had art in it. So possibly designers wouldn't go for those jobs. But from my perspective, some of the graduates we know and young people in participatory design or co-creation or whatever would have been absolutely ideal. And they would have been employed and So I was quite interested in that as well, that actually through ACE and through these types of projects, actually there's employment and project opportunities for people who call themselves a designer rather than an artist. So I thought that was interesting in terms of this, coming together today as well.
It's an interesting one because we had a designer respond to the brief because we'd worked with him before, so he was interested in our approach. And rather than as an artist come and present his art, if you like, he designed robot drawing machines and had an installation in Boston Stump, which is the equivalent of, if people don't know, it's the Minster, just like the cathedral. So there were these little robot drawing machines bouncing around the floor, and people were coming in and putting their own pieces of paper under there. And so he was, as a designer, designing an experience that would engage and empower, if you like. So I think his was one of the more interesting interventions.
And the whole funding stream it's creative people and places. It's not arts people and places, it's creative and things.
When you went to Barcelona, have the responses been made since that trip?
Yes, that was a few years ago, and I guess I mentioned it because it's in the part.
So was the idea of that trip to empower sort of the residents that you took to make the art, or was it to interest them in the art, working with the artists?
It was both, and I think some of what happened was that we did work with the designer and we brought together some designers and artists to do some workshops with the residents of one village that had been there to design a new frontage for their village hall. And so that was their experience informing their advice, their brief, if you like, to the designers.
Okay.
But then in other places, it was just literally the inspirational experience that they had that they then brought back for them to design and make the artworks or the pieces. It was a bit of both.
Yeah.
I had a question which maybe relates to something I was thinking about yesterday when we were talking about projects here. One of the things that as a kind of creative community we need to do is to look at the like how this kind of work is commissioned and look at kind of I guess working with the understanding of our commissioners and I just wondered whether that maybe related to your experiences of introducing arts practices in an area where there's probably been very little arts practice there, and explaining, so if you've got any experiences of kind of having to, of explaining the value of the arts as you use them in an environment where people just thought, because we, for example, we might go to, we were talking about doing work for local authorities, or the local authorities were like, design is about like making stuff or doing websites or doing graphic design, while we need designers to help us address social problems.
Yeah.
And I just wondered whether you've got any experiences of that might relate to that.
I think the authority that we worked with was enlightened in some way. The leader of the council was connected through her family with the arts, and the senior officer, he wasn't a senior officer when he was first given responsibility to deliver an art service. He was in the planning department, but he became a senior officer, and as he progressed up that ladder within the council, he took with him his commitment to provide space wherever we could for artists and designers to be involved in a more expansive way in the delivery of their services. And it was his promotion within the authority that allowed, there were decisions about economic development partnerships with Lincolnshire County Council, and rather than that be taken by the housing team or the planning team, he said, work it out with the arts team. And so it was the arts team that decided that money would be invested in the villages, in the development of those spaces. So the trip to Barcelona fed into the redesign of the village hall frontage because of his vision that the artists and designers could play a part in devising those schemes, if you like.
Yeah,
So if the proper answer, I guess, is it's about trying to establish long-term developmental relationships so that you can do things in small steps and win their confidence along the way. But if you've got
finding allies, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's interesting to remind
it's them understanding your potency. What can you bring
Yeah.
that adds to what it is that they're thinking of doing? And once they glimpse it, it's like Mike Locke, who's our liaison officer with the district council. He actually came to be our liaison officer from the sports side. He wasn't really committed to the arts, but now he's seen the potency of what can be done and how people can be, the experience that people have. He is the staunchest advocate. So there's something you could do. You could get Mike Locke to go and talk to any of the authorities that you're thinking of working with you to go, you don't know where this is going to end, but it's going to be much better than you ever thought it could be, and good things will happen along the way. So go on that journey.
So we were talking, I think Adam was about those like bringing your local authority allies with you to talk about.
Yes.
But that's interesting. It reminds me of because I met there's a graphic designer in Leeds who did some work in hospitals through the hospital's arts budget, and it was because the person in the trust who was managing the arts budget had trained as a graphic designer, so then they could see the value of it. So it's like finding these allies and ways in, and then using those examples, I suppose, of going and saying, so those people then got that kind of authority to speak to other people and see things.
I think it's also a case of taking people to see examples and talking to their peers in another area and said, we did an environmental improvement, we work with an artist. And actually, so what we've got, we haven't got an off-the-shelf design where we've just gone to a catalogue and picked benches. And it hasn't actually cost that much more, but you can have a much more interesting and something very, very set in the place. And I think that, but it's giving people the confidence. So I've worked with local authorities before where they think, well, we'll just do it. We'll just get the catalogue and we'll just pick three or four things. Whereas actually, you can bring an artist in to work with the design team and really raise the level.
It's selling the process, isn't it, as well as the
and
outcome.
finding those champions as well, because like Marion, finding those champions in local authorities who really see the value of it and then kind of advocate for involvement in arts. How do you pick those people up?
What I think is interesting here is that the arts have a long-term tradition of working with community, and it's a good way in. Design doesn't. And, at the edge you're at, you were saying, can we supply the chairs or not? And, it's like people relate to the arts, and it's a kind of good thing. People don't relate to the design. It doesn't have the same engagement, and I think it's something that we might begin to consider about how does design, because, what you can do in social work, if you have a community which has things it needs to do, you take them to another community to raid, if you like, for those things. It's kind of what you're doing at the moment. There was a group in Holland, really quite interesting. They gave a disadvantaged community disposable cameras and said, go out to things and other places you would like and steal what you see, photographic, and then come back and lay that over what you want to do. And that's quite interesting. That's kind of getting kind of similar. But design doesn't stand on its own, does it? In this way, in the way that arts does, or architecture does. It doesn't relate in the same way. Why doesn't it? I'm really curious about that. Why doesn't design have that impact or that understanding?
I've worked. You mentioned architecture. I worked with an organisation called Sans Façon a few years ago, and they are actually an artist and architecture team that work together, and they've done some really interesting things. So there's the architecture side, and they've looked at the ways that they can use art practice to engage architecture. So it seems to be interesting to see there's more examples of designers working with artists and looking at different ways of engaging.
It seems to me that there's a role, just in terms of what we're talking about, but on the network as well, in terms of universities with students that can engage with non-HE access, people outside the university, communities, councils and so on, then if we're talking about the fact that one thing we need to be able to do is build this network of champions inside or just to get one champion inside the organisation, but to help that champion to be able to experience it for the first time, sometimes it's about diminishing the risk that they're going to experience. So if you can make it so, okay, they might be laughed at, they're not going to get the sack for wasting loads of money or criticised for wasting loads of money, and perhaps HE is a place where they can have that experience, engage and sort of have that experience, get an example without it costing them a load of money if it doesn't work out, or perhaps externally funded work in the context of practice-led research or something is another space that enables these experiences to be had with the risks being minimised for some of the more vulnerable, if you like, participants.
I think that's right, and to some extent that's partly the reason why the design has not been made so accessible, and people have been empowered to control that space, if you like. Our authority will fund me to do a community project that comes up with a piece of artwork, but to design the whole park and the building that goes next to it is going to require a vast amount of money and a vast risk. So to some extent, what you're saying is the level of risk. If you can demonstrate that some of the risk is removed, some of the cost is removed, then maybe there is a chance to take on bigger projects and have more of an impact.
And sometimes you involve artists in these projects. They just ask the question, why are you doing that way? And we've always done that way. Can we do it another way? Often it's just simply a case of being involved in those design meetings and just asking a question and getting people to think about things differently. And it might not necessarily cost any more, but it's just a different approach, which will make the project unique.
And also, ACE and others, artists, are now thinking, okay, creativity, there is research to prove that it's a good way of engaging in different arenas to get conversations going about how can we improve things. Within the health system, within sport, so there are these parallels going on with, sports scientists and sports people to do with well-being. There's people working in the sustainability area that are interested in well-being and engaging with, different stakeholders and users, or whatever we want to call actors. The arts are doing the same, and ACE are doing that in the UK. Big society, New Labour kind of agendas to do with communities and community connectivity. So there's these areas in healthcare, sports, the art, design, and I just thought it's within universities, and that's why I'm really interested in that, because it's happening here at Lincoln in a small university. There's lots of and theatre studies as well. They're all finding ways of trying to connect with communities and collect information on how to improve things with those actors. And I think we should be sharing tools, methods, ways of engaging, language, and that's why I thought it'd be great if Nick and his team were here, because I think we have things to learn from them and they have things to learn from us. Because I think service design is a new concept to you, but they've been working in the NHS and in areas like that. Well, maybe we could share practice service design within a health NHS context, also with an arts approach to engaging and getting into those spaces and contexts.
Absolutely. I think as well, when we bring it back to the conversation around evaluation, how we best communicate the richness of programmes like this, I think that broad collaboration around socially engaged interests and practices is an absolute starting point. And it's something that we started to explore here in connecting designers and the participatory arts movements and ways of working, but also with participatory elements within architecture as well. And as I was saying, that's broadened out to engaging with social research, with social scientists. And that's absolutely, that collaborative approach is absolutely the starting point to get this kind of 360 holistic perspective of how we best communicate the outcomes and impacts in the short term and the long term of this work.
And in this way, I think you begin to see that maybe designers kind of work like artists in one way. Maybe, well, certainly where I come from, you tend to find designers are working more like sociologists. And our designers also working as choreographers it's almost like, we're almost as designers, we're finding we're trying to find things we attach to and are about, rather than design of itself on its own. And I think design stands very well of itself on its own. It's always has to be applied to some other kind of activity. Is that making sense? Some kind of other activity? That's not bad. Necessarily. I agree. That's not bad. It's about trying to be honest about what our relationships and roles could be around these things, and where do we see designers acting in certain ways. Try to explain.
No, I think you're right. And it's the same with the arts as well. So, Katie on the spot. Katie as a social artist, what you just talked about is exactly mirrored in the arts, which is why the collaboration between the two is so important.
Yeah. So I remember trying to explain a socially engaged project to my sister-in-law in Paris, and she says, "You sound like some kind of religious evangelical social worker." And I thought, yeah, probably. And then I tried to explain, no, it's design, and she said, no, it's not, because design's about that table and this chair. And it's quite interesting to be thinking about that.
Design is about that table and that chair and this sort of thing, and that's for me. I think this is the power in sort of these where you can use these tables, chairs, this familiarity, this language to actually sort of engage in and bring communities together in and around the thing that you put out there.
But isn't design? It's not just the table and the chair; it's linking people to the table.
That's
and the chair.
yeah. It's always the yes, it is. It's always the interactions that occur. It's relational. It's the chair dependent. The chair, the table is dependent on the community around it. People are using the thing. There's work being done in this area.
The work we're doing the stuff that we're very interested in at the moment within the centre is basically about the notion of design that's both public forming and public serving. So I think quite often we think about design as having sort of this use value, which is actually about public serving. Now, there is a community of interest and community of practice, and design seeks to serve that community of interest and practice to make their activity more effective or to facilitate their activity in some way. But actually then design's got this other role, and I think the other role comes to the fore perhaps in the sort of work we're talking about today, which is about the ability of design to be public forming. Where actually sometimes even by creating an object, you enable the public to come into being. The example was given by Peter, doesn't it, the Positive Design Centre in Delft, is this thing about the bag snagger. Basically, once there is an object with a hook on the end of it that you can use to pull bags out of trees in Central Park, actually groups of people start to come together around this object because they all have a common interest in, oh, now I can reach that bag, let's get it down. In fact, I'll come with you next time we go out snagging those bags, and we'll clear all the plastic bags out of the street. And out of this park. And what you've actually done is this object, has actually enabled this group of people to come together around a practice. That practice actually is indicative of a preferred way of living. That's got all these other values attached to it that aren't necessarily about commercial value. And so that thing around public forming and public serving, I don't know whether it's unique to design, but it's certainly something that design and designers can do.
But another nice example of someone operating across this sphere, sort of a very fluid, is she an artist, is she an engineer, is she a designer, is Natalie Zheremenko. And again, another project that taps into some of the things we did yesterday in terms of hacking, the Feral Dogs project, where she gets these robotic toy dogs, fits them out with sensors that detect contaminated land, gives it to the kids playing on this contaminated land. They start playing with these dogs, it starts building this data set that she can take to the councils and say, look how it says these kids are playing there. So drawing attention to the issue around this polluted space, but bringing sorts of different communities together that wouldn't necessarily, these kids and their families weren't really that bothered. But she drew attention to the issue through play, through these tools, through these objects, and then I think it was in Brooklyn, wasn't it, somewhere like that.
Brooklyn.
Yeah. So there's quite a few recent examples of this sort of agile, fluid practice and practitioners not labelling themselves. That's the thing. It's like You know, sometimes it's odd, sometimes it don't. It depends on whoever's looking at it.
I'm quite in.
But isn't, you know, going back to where we started with the thing about objects, what's very interesting about that is that what we're doing as designers is we're creating plays, and there is a stage, where it is, there are the props, here they are, there is a script, and the script is the kind of social part, and the props are the things that make that social part
And
work.
the tour scripts as well, isn't it? And also you've got the tour's magical scripts that sort of works in that next.
And you create little plays is what you kind of do.
Shift from utility to meaning to
Experience.
to experience. Yeah.
I just wonder, I'm always interested in how do you build on the shoulders of those that have gone before you. And sometimes you have those artists that have interventions and they just do what they do, and it's about them and their artistic practice and the place and the space that they're in. I'm just wondering how, with say something like service design or systems approaches, meeting points with individual artists that come in, they're being commissioned, they're in a place, they're doing something, reflect on it, go away, and it's quite unique. But then you've got kind of systems design and service design where you are trying to kind of manage a situation and understand a situation, join up the dots and use various methods and tools to make sure that you can formulate it and manage it. I'm quite interested in those spaces where those two things meet and how we can learn from those possibly two extremes as well. And does that make sense? So, you've got Daniela with her work in service design, systems design and other places where they're trying to figure out how you can use these actors and stakeholders to get data and to change behaviours and to do these things. And then you've got these kind of collisions of artists coming in and doing quite random projects and things, and how we can get the both from all of those worlds in some ways, and how we can learn from each other. So you might, with your projects and your large amount of money and what you need to do, you kind of do projects and then you move on, you reflect a bit. Maybe with some service and systems thinking, you might be more effective in what you do. And some of those interactions possibly in the national health where you're quite systemised in what you do, actually having a bit more randomness from the way others might approach might actually be great. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that we can definitely, because there's many ways that we can work, that art and design can work together. You must at the front end of the project, if you like, where it's like, okay, sharing methods and tools, how can we get this done? Or also on the back end of the project, which is absolutely in terms of how to sustain the practice of art and design in communities. One of the things that kept coming up yesterday is, well, who's going to pay for it? And if we look at the conditions that we're in at the moment, there was a guy in Korea recently, the guy that used to run the Social Innovation Fund in the States, and his argument was there's no new money. There is no new money, there's no new money around, so if you want money in one place, you've got to take the money away from another place. So to decide where it's fair and appropriate to take the money from to put it in this new place, then we need to be able to evaluate it. And we know we've got all these issues about how, what sort of value then, whose value. The value of the agency that's funding it, which in this case I think it talks about the fact that it was about this money is particularly about increasing the diversity of the arts. What was that main strapline that they were talking about?
Creating on places.
Yeah, the Arts Council.
Arts Council is great art for everyone.
Great art for everyone. So if we take that as I know that it's much more nuanced than that in the depth of it, but I guess where I'm trying to go with it is that the Arts Council's job, if you like, is to get more people engaged in the arts. The housing department or its job of a certain town is to make sure that their residents are happier and better served and sort of have greater well-being in their public housing. Another person's role might be to sort of try and ensure there's some sort of more trust and connectivity within the community because it reduces antisocial behaviour. That might come under a policing budget. So what's interesting to both artists and designers on the back end of this is, okay, where are we getting our funding? From the Arts Council or from the Design Council or from the HRC Connected Community Programme? We need to be able to have these multiple ways of assessing our impacts at the back end of our programmes, and that is truly shareable between community engaged artists and community engaged designers, because it's like, well, plug that into the back of my project, and at least I can explain what it is I've done with the money in a sensible way that means it might get funded again. Is that?
Yeah, I've just got, so I'm thinking about, I mean, maybe one of the ways is thinking about anchoring it in the sort of the context that you're working on, what you're doing or what you're aiming to do, rather than, I was just thinking, as soon as you start talking in terms of, art or design practice, you're kind of bringing in a whole set of assumptions and ideas about what that might mean in relation to people's experiences of ideas of art and design, and that maybe one of the ways to get around some of this stuff is to actually be thinking in terms of sort of where you're working and what you're trying to do as a way of explaining what it is that you're setting out to do and trying to achieve, and then that might also impact on evaluation and then comparing things across different kinds of practices. So I'm just thinking about when from the area that you're working with, that you're working in, and that experience of trying to explain what I do to a family that have no frame of reference for that. They've got pretty much no concept of what design is, and for a long time art was sort of landscape paintings in the village or in art exhibitions and sort of experiences.
Yeah.
So experiences of ideas like art and design are very different to all of our experiences, because we've all had some contact with art, we've got very, very sophisticated ideas about those things. But then it's, just looking at that thing of actually when you start talking about, well, what we're trying to do is we're trying to work with people to make places better. And almost the practice. Because I was thinking about this yesterday as well, at what point do we actually, when do we or don't we enable what we're doing as design, or as a design being part of it? And that's something I was thinking about in my project that I haven't always, I approach everything as a designer because that's my background and my kind of the way that I frame my approach to the work. But I don't always, sometimes I go in and go, well, as a designer I think like this, but sometimes it's just like, well, let's just focus on the work and the context and what we're trying to do, rather than bringing those into that conversation with actually people on the ground in the way we understand what we're trying to do.
I found it interesting where you said early on that, or I sort of noted it down, is that you're trying to help people upscale their ambition, and you try and inspire people before you work with the people, or before you get them to work on their own terrain, so that they can shift their ambition, and I think that's what design tries to do in lots of ways. And I'm sort of relating that to Ian's point about, does design have its stand in its own right? And it's sort of the Arts Council saying art for everyone. If the Design Council said design for everyone, everyone would go, what?
Yeah.
Why? Whereas I think there's something about art for everyone that a sort of an unwritten code that art is good for the soul, or art can be beneficial
creativity
in creative practice, and maybe there's a need to help unpack for us as designers, to help unpack why design can have any use in this assisting people to revision what can be achieved or revision their aspirations.
I think if you said to a lot of people design for everyone, the answer might be IKEA. And actually, that's what Pellion talks about, and this is why he returns to his notion of things, because basically design has been objectified, and things is about to take, even the word thing is used to describe object more often than its original root in socio-material constructions. So actually the work that those guys are doing about thinking through from a theoretical perspective, actually design not just being about an object, but about you know, this broader sort of socio-material construction system, ecosystem, then it's about getting that understanding of design through, because then actually it starts to mean more in these other ways. And I guess the flip side of that is, well, is that a bit of a mouthful to try and communicate to people? And actually, I quite like this idea of, I don't care if you call it art design, better sounds good to me.
Yes.
And actually, the guy that was talking about the Social Innovation Fund in the States, his definition of social innovation was better.
Yes.
He said basically, if it makes it better, if it gives us more of the social impact that we desire for the same money, that's social innovation.
Yes. It's back to empowering people to make things better, isn't it? It's your point. It's the,
to want things better.
It's the human interaction with the consequences of what you do. When you were talking, I was thinking about the conversation I had with our marketing person the other day, and the old description of marketing is about, okay, we've got to advertise this, and then we do flyers, we do posters, and the person said to me, it's about communication. You've got to think about what message you want to send out and what impact you want as a consequence of sending that message out, and that's the same as the difference in design. It's not just the table, it's the consequence of that table being in that place with the people that are going to come.
There was some people out here we should hear from, I think.
I just want to say better for everyone.
Better for everyone.
But so it's about labelling.
I'm sorry,
Labelling practice.
we've spoken a lot. I think there were some hands up over here that I think people need to come and join in.
There's a point here that like implicit in this conversation on making things better or like engaging communities is stuff around like addressing inequality and social justice. That's how you would say it's obviously from a like sociological perspective or whatever. And then sort of the explicit way that that's sort of traditionally represented would be kind of politics and like who you elect as your council, in your council. No, and it's interesting that hasn't come up in the conversation at all, kind of explicit. If you engage a community in a conversation, where does that conversation go? And traditionally that would be probably into kind of some democratic representation and some self-organisation. And we spoke about that as well.
Can I answer that? Because I think that's part of the bravery. I think that's why what we're talking about is about empowering people to make decisions about how they improve their lives, whether it's the stuff that they do that leads to better health, whether it's the spaces that they live in, and that challenges the existing power structure, whether it's central government or local authorities. And that's why it's challenging, that's why it's brave, but I think that's why it's exciting. It's not just the specific experiences, creative experiences that we're providing through transporting, it's the consequences of those things that make people feel empowered to then carry on doing that or use that skill to do other things. And that's beyond the control of central government or local authorities. And one of the things about Creative People and Places that I think is really exciting is Arts Council said local authorities could not be the lead partner. It had to be led by a partnership between artists and community representatives. And so from the very beginning, the door was shut to local authorities coming in and saying, this is what we want you to do that delivers on our agenda. And so there's space to actually respond to what it is that people are saying is their agenda, which is quite exciting and challenging.
I'm going to a planning meeting in Boston on next week, and we saw the minutes of the meeting, the reason why we're going to this meeting, and it was quite astounding what was actually said, wasn't it? It was like, oh, they've got this money, so how are we going to get some of this money?
Oh.
So that's the basis we've been invited, and we've got a really interesting opportunity because there's a project around Boston Waterways that's going to be about to start, and clearly they're thinking, oh, they've got money, we'll have some of their money. But we're in a situation where we don't have to give them money, but what we can do is we can say, all right, we have got some funding. What we will do, we will embed an artist into the design team of what you're doing. We will provide you some match funding, but you've got to say, right, we'll put an artist in, we'll give the artist a budget, you've got to match that, you've got to agree that the artist has got so much money to spend. So we've got an opportunity to do that. Whether they're going to do it or not will be the interesting thing, but because we're not tied into local authority funding, so we can go with an offer, but keep control, keep artistic control of what's happening.
As a designer, as part of that team, I would have come in and said, with a design thinking hat on, what's the problem you're trying to solve by putting an artist in there? And I think that's where it's really interesting, having artist designers architects who work in participatory design in those spaces when you've got those opportunities, because that would be my first reaction. Have you identified the problem that you are possibly trying to address, act, or better? Where I know from participatory arts projects, it's like, let's put an artist in there and shake it up, without necessarily having some kind of framed response. Now, as I've got involved in participatory design or co-creation more, I've loosened my grip on having to have it framed, because sometimes just shaking it up is just really interesting, rather than trying to have a middle, beginning and end to it, which often designers like, by having a brief and all the rest of it, So I'm really interested in those collisions that could happen by bringing in these different creative professions that are interested in community connections, community embetterment, engaging communities, defining what communities are.
I think what Richard was saying about match, not just match funding, but I'm interested also in sort of match commitment to action.
To a new vision.
To a new vision. And so it's interesting where you can go, okay, that we're working on another project to do with graffiti, and we're trying to get some councils to go, yeah, we're going to commit to some action to find out what people really want and what they're interested in, not just what we want. And I think that to say we can locate a designer is one thing, or an artist is one thing, but if we don't try and bring with that or work with perhaps what we would call the duty holders or the people with responsibility around those areas or the area we're working in to come and say, yeah, we're going to actually commit to something as well. And it doesn't have to be financial in every case. In some cases it's great if it is, but in other cases it might just be an authority with some power or some ability to go, okay, yeah, we're going to bring some of our people on board and commit them over a period of time as well.
That's the only way it can be sustained.
Yeah.
And to some extent, that's our challenge. We've got 3 years of funding with Transported. We've got a bubble that the Arts Council have created for us. And we can enjoy the freedom that we've got from being under the control of a local authority. But our task is to win them over for the things that we do and the consequences of them, so that they will sustain some of them, or the health authority will sustain some of them, or the County Council Economic Development team will sustain some of them, because of the value that they're getting that are their objective to deliver anyway. And what we're doing is showing, as we have in North West England, that we can do it, and we can do it and do it in a different way.
Can I just ask, what is the expected outcome of the 3-year project? Obviously not to get funding. So how is that, what is the kind of, what you think might be the outcome, and how is that kind of evaluated and then reported?
That's a really good question. Essentially, Arts Council have given the money to increase the numbers of people engaging in the arts. So that's the first.
How are you going to measure that? How are you going to evaluate that?
At every event, we're obviously gathering all of that data. That's relatively straightforward. They're also saying that they want people's opinion about the arts to change, so that they want us to identify what people's opinion is now and identify how it's changed. Tracking, and they want more activity to have come about as a consequence of this investment, not just in our programme, but secondary consequences. So artists coming together to do more things because Transported was initially invested in it. So grappling with how we're going to evaluate and track all of that is part of what we're doing at the moment.
Because the Arts Council have been doing this for 10 years and it's just not worked. The same 10% of really engaged people are getting most of the arts activity. So I think what they're doing, they've got this money and so what we're going to do, we're going to throw it at the places where people aren't engaged, and we're going to see what happens on an absolutely local level. So although we've got there's several projects around the country, and we're all connected, we're all doing very different things, and it's trying to see what actually works at that local level, rather than some national scheme, some national analysis being done. So I did all that, and I sat down in a meeting in the Arts Council 4 or 5 years ago, and they went, we can't say it's worked or not. We don't know.
Go back to what Anne was talking about designers like problems and so on, and the impact of trying to solve problems. My question is that in the spaces which we're beginning to design in now, is the problem-solving approach right, or are we more dealing with issues which are more open to this issue-based approach? And I think environmental artists do, and therefore it can be disruptive, whatever. I think, certainly in what we do is we look at issues more than problems, because the issues actually open up lots of opportunity and activity, whereas problems imply, I've got to do this thing. So I think it's quite an interesting, question. Are we more issue-based than problem-based?
I think there's something fundamentally, it's intrinsic to what both art and design does in a situation. It asks the awkward questions, as you said before. It goes in and asks what might appear to be quite naive questions, but really fundamental questions about the nature of what's going on and why is that way and why can't it be different. And I think this quality of design to move meaning is probably one of the most important features. The whole process of inception, when you get asked to go and do something in a community by perhaps a local authority or whatever, because you've got a budget, and that's actually as much of a problem as it is a solution. How do you actually get into that situation where you fundamentally know what the new questions to ask are in that space, rather than parachuting a solution, which I'm sure you never do, onto the community, or for the community to feel that they've been given exactly what they originally asked for, which is never really what they want. So it's design's capacity to create dialogue, or art's capacity to create that dialogue within that point of conception. And I think the moving meaning is often now moving meaning beyond the immediate gain through fiscal value, financial gain, and the demonstration of that, to creating a mechanism to actually demonstrate social worth over an extended period. And if design and art are an agent for being able to do that, then that's really what we need to promote. I can remember hearing something on the radio recently, and the specifics of it escape me now, but it was somebody commenting on the fact that British institutions have more cultural collateral and value than any of our kind of business capital has. So the thing that the rest of the world is now perceiving about Great Britain is its capacity to use its sort of tried and tested and developed and evolved institutions to actually introduce cultural elements into situations that have never, desperately need to be transformed in some way or form. And you contrast that with the, I suppose, the norm, which is, what can we do fiscally, financially to support the situation? What can we do, in some cases militarily, to alter the balance of power or politically change the situation to what might be perceived as a better one. It's perhaps a more, insidious isn't the right word, but our capacity is to kind of act below the line over an extended period and to create value that way. I think the difficulty here is actually demonstrating mechanisms to be able to prove that we're doing that and demonstrate it so that it creates the argument to do more of the same. And we got to a point yesterday we were talking about aspects of, I think it cropped up first thing this morning as well, risk. How do you actually get into a conversation with an organisation to defer their risk assessment of you getting involved? You know, what is it that actually allows them to think, yeah, it's safe for us to actually bring these people in and to work with them over a period of time.
I think that's where you get with the sort of peer-to-peer encouragement, where so a planning officer in one town meets a planning officer from the other side of the country that's done this, and it's worked, and we produced an amazingly designed space. So I think it's that finding an equivalent somewhere else that's done it differently, that they can relate to, because you bring an artist in. The conversation is quite difficult initially. It's just a different language, so you need people that speak the same language as we sort of talked about advocates, and that approach works well. And that's one of the things we're going to be looking at, where we can take people to other places that have done that. So we don't want to do the same. We want them to do the same method.
But in reality, now is a really difficult time to be doing it, because all of the local authorities have disinvested in their cultural development officers, and that will be the easy door for you to go knocking on and say, can we have a relationship with you that opens the door for artists and designers to be involved in your project. They've all gone, they're no longer in.
Yeah, I can immediately see that that's a disadvantage. I can see it as an advantage as well, because they're scrapping around for ways and means.
Absolutely.
Which might be why we need to be able to show evaluation against other drivers outside of the cultural ones. Shall we have a look at what you've got out there to show us, and come back in and maybe see how this relates back to some of the stuff we were talking about yesterday from Rob's summary? And just very aware, there's never enough time, really, is there?
Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's interesting.
Right.
Can we come out and see your caravan?
Yes,
Tell us what it's all about. What do you want to tell us?
Do you want me to tell you about it now, while you're all together? Yeah? And related to...
Transported, yes.
Yeah. So the caravan out there is a movable museum of found objects, and it came out of a piece of research that I did. I'm a socially engaged artist, and I spend a lot of my time working in located spaces with groups that have got a particular need. So I go in and address that need and then go off onto the next project. And so I kind of wondered how it would be different to take my practice online. So initially I put an invitation out on Facebook and Twitter and on my blog for people to send me small found objects, and it had to be something that had some personal value to them. So it could be anything, but they just had to have some sort of connection. And people sent me all sorts of things. So I physically sent them in the post. When I received them, I photographed them, documented them, and then when I had about 200 objects, I started thinking about where I was actually going to put them. And initially it was going to be a one-off exhibition, but I couldn't find the right sort of space. And so that's where the caravan came in, which is actually the caravan that I take my children on holiday in. So we haven't had any holidays in it for a couple of years, which they are quite annoyed about. But everything in there has been treated exactly the same as it would be in a proper museum. So all the objects have been accessioned. Every collection, when you look in the cupboards, there's a QR code which will take you back to the online part of the project. So as the project grew and I was photographing the objects, each person had like a little online gallery. And then where it fits into Transported is that the kind of idea of it is that it takes an unexpected experience to unsuspecting audiences. So it's always been, I've not wanted to take out people who are already engaged in the arts and understand it. It's more about taking a museum experience to people that would never want to visit the museum. And so with Transported, we went to 5 different locations. We went to a truck stop, a church, Asda, market,
country fair.
Oh, and a country fair as well. So we had a mix of places. Some places were, so like with the country fair, people were expecting to spend their leisure time in a space. So seeing a caravan was still a surprise, but they were kind of, almost primed for it. Whereas Asda, when you turn up and do your shopping, you don't expect to see a caravan pitched up out front. So the idea of using it as a consultation activity was really to provide people with experience that really just started conversations happening. And because it's such a familiar space, it's a non-threatening space, people were quite happy to come into a caravan not knowing what they were going to find in there because they've got associations with, you know, family holidays. And it did work really well. People just wanted to talk. And as well, because all the objects are found objects, you know, it kind of created that curiosity. So just people who perhaps wouldn't engage and wouldn't go into a museum and want to talk about the artefacts, they would go in there and just, you know, we had so many people tell stories, didn't we? And stories about their collections as well.
Some of which were very disturbing, actually.
Was there any relationship between the communities you took them to and the communities who you asked for the objects from?
Yeah, there was actually, which was surprising because I mean, one of the reasons why I set it up was I live and work in Boston, but actually a lot of my work I have to travel for because I'm freelance. And when I set it up, I got in touch with quite a few people that I knew locally. I got in touch with some photographers and they let me have studio space and loan their equipment. Somebody else did me some marketing material, and then also because I put an invitation out on Facebook, there was a mix of kind of family and friends that engaged in the project as well. There were people that, you know, generally with my kind of practice, I don't badger friends and family to get involved. You know, I kind of keep the two separate because it was in a space where there were contacts. Then some of the stuff is, yeah, from local people, which probably made a difference as well when we were touring because, you know, people kind of matched the locations and collections.
And what I'm interested in the fact that Katie and other artists are engaging with communities, and then you've got people who have set up small design businesses, Us Create, those others that are using similar creative tactics to engage with communities. You know, Us Create, with the project I was involved with them in Kingston on a housing estate, you know, we set up a fete and a fair, and it's finding those kind of fun and familiar settings to be able to engage with those communities and in some ways build their trust. So I'm really interested in, you know, what Transported are trying to do, engage with communities, because they're trying to engage with the unengaged who aren't engaging with the arts. And we're trying to do that to do with whatever agendas we've got, you know, health, whatever. So I thought it was really interesting for us to cross-tabulate and share experiences of how we're trying to engage with communities and build trust. You know, because sometimes these projects that we've got via the NHS or something, well, you know, we're space shipping in, aren't we? And if we're space shipping in and we're trying to build trust, instead of going out and the acknowledgement is why we're there is that, you know, going in with social survey approaches like questionnaires and interviewing in a very formal way, which, you know, is not working. By using creativity to go into those spaces, I think we can learn from artists and artists can learn from designers, because, you know, then I'd ask Katie, well, how are you evaluating that data in terms of the project you're doing Transported? And, you know, you might not be. How could you improve the way that you're engaging in the way that you've done, you know, and learn from possibly designers who are working with anthropologists and sociologists? So I thought that was a nice space to get discourse going as well.